podcast. Life is a hideous thing.
Out there, somewhere in the cosmos, perhaps, alien life may be watching. We are alive. We are intelligent. We must know. Our brains are one of the most enchanting and complex things known to humanity. I think, therefore I am. But what happens when they go wrong? In a not-so-distant future, we will plant the seeds of our AI destruction. A future where humans need not apply.
Communication is information. Information is knowledge. Knowledge is power. Power is everything. Power is everything. Power is everything. Power is everything.
I'd like to welcome Ian Christe to Life is a Hideous Thing podcast.
Bleh.
Yeah, how you doing?
I'm all right.
So I was going to...
Thanks. It's wonderful to be hideous.
Do you know that quote? It's from H.P. Lovecraft.
Yes.
Are you ever a fan of Lovecraft?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Because I can't figure if some people actually take me as being just a negative bastard. And they're like, oh, that show sounds terrible. But once people understand where Lovecraft was coming from, I think people kind of get it, and if they're a fan of his as well, they totally get it and they're like into it. So it just depends on who you speak to.
No, I think he's finally kind of come into his own, at least in the States. You know,
Yeah.
you see people walking around with Lovecraft T-shirts and things like that.
He
was a distant footnote to Edgar Allan Poe for a long, long time, but
It's possible that his legacy might actually overcome Poe's. I don't know. It's difficult to say.
I think it's definitely growing up in the States. You read The Raven and things like that in school, and there are so many movie adaptations. The old Vincent Price, The Pit and the Pendulum, and
Yeah.
The Mask of Red Death. So the Lovecraft stuff, I think, is much more. They really only started making Lovecraft films in the 80s. So
Yeah, were you ever a fan of like Reanimator or something like
yeah,
that?
yes.
I love that.
Those came at the perfect time. I was like 14 or 15 when those came out, and it's pretty much exactly in the same mindset as all the bands that started drawing from that immediately.
So I'm going to try and start the podcast because I always do this, Ian, right? I end up chatting with people and the fucking talk, the talk goes all over the place. And then when I come to edit it, I can't even find the start of the conversation.
Okay.
And it takes me like an hour to find it. So
Yeah.
let me start at the beginning. I've done the introductions. That's cool. I know where that is. I've always been curious personally about publishing. And being a layperson in that respect, don't really understand it. And I've always had an ambition to write. I've always admired people that have that discipline, and I found it writing to be the most extreme form of expression. I guess I figured that out when I read Charles Bukowski's Women. I found it to be very like me, an alcoholic womanizer. And there's never enough time to read, so
It's not defined as much by your technology. That's for sure.
yeah, because
You don't. Like the kind of music we listen to and are talking about wouldn't have been possible 50 years ago because there was no drums. Drums were small and loose, and amps were small or didn't exist at all. And with writing, you really are just looking at a blank piece of paper with your smudgy pen or your laptop or whatever. You're stuck with yourself until you get it done. That's the joyless, lonely task of writing. But when you hit the right phrase or the things start to really roll, it's a wonderful thing. Especially several years later when people finally can read it and tell you they enjoyed a piece of it.
yeah, and that's what I mean, is you can really affect people. I mean, personally, I feel like I'm a failed artist, and when I say that, I mean painter. And I became a musician kind of like as a plan B, and that went where it went. And I'm always like a wannabe writer because I think that's where I fantasize myself to end up. I don't know why. You physically got to fucking write something first. You know what I mean? And like I say, it's a discipline. But as arts,
It's also a nice job, for it's a suitable pastime for someone over the age of 25. You really don't even start to come to your own, I don't think, writing until you're seasoned and at least have one or two gray pubic hairs.
we're very similar age. I was born in 1970,
Hmm.
in June. So you're a little bit older than me, like 3 weeks,
Yeah, exactly.
something like that. So
Yeah, 3 months, I think.
we're kind of from the same, like, totally from the same era. I mean, we can both brag that we were born before Jimi Hendrix died. Seems
Barely.
because it was in September of '70 when he passed away. But
That's right.
it's fucking crazy to say that. It sounds so old.
Yeah, I saw this the other day. I saw this giant. Basically, I think someone had collected every photo known of Hendrix from that day, and it really looks like it's from. It could be 400 years ago.
I get that feeling.
Just a vacant, kind of just a big field in Germany somewhere, and a bunch of hippies with floppy hats.
So you've had like quite a lot of job descriptions. So I'll throw them all at you and see if you agree with all of them.
Okay.
So you've been a freelance writer.
Yes, I started a fanzine when I was 15 or so, and that led to writing about music for magazines.
Yeah, and that led to being an author. So you could say you're an author too.
It led to writing about other things besides music for magazines, and then I kind of circled back and at the end of the 90s started writing Sound of the Beast, which came out in the UK in a kind of slapdash fashion. I wasn't too happy with that release. I think that the US edition is sold more than the so-called proper British edition. That was after I'd spent maybe 5 or 6 years writing about technology and both computer things and also just I was writing for a magazine called Popular Mechanics here and writing about things like science fiction kind of things that are happening now, like meat grown in laboratories in Holland.
Oh wow.
Like pork tissue raised on sheets of plastic that expands and contracts in the sun in order to give it a kind of a muscular texture.
Weird. It sounds like something out of Soylent Green.
Well, it's probably about one DNA strain away from that.
Yeah.
And then Sound of the Beast came out of growing up in metal completely, and at that what seemed to me like that late date, nobody had really written a story. Nobody had gotten the story down. At that point, heavy metal was 30 years old, and you still couldn't go into a bookstore and find any kind of even half-assed attempt. So I circled back and started that, and then when I was done, that led to publishing with Bazillion Points, just because I knew so many other people that had books in them that had been through, incredible moments in history, like Metallion from Norway or the We Got Power guys who were on the scene and on the LA hardcore punk scene from day one. And I knew how hard it was to get Sound of the Beast completed and what kind of crazy hoops I had to jump through. And I knew none of these people had the patience for that. So I figured I had learned enough that I could, I had some kind of momentum, and I threw it into putting these books out.
I know you've been playing in bands, but I couldn't find anywhere where it said what instrument you played.
I'm proud to say that I supported myself for 1 month in New York City as a fiddle player. I played in a bluegrass band called Grouse Mountain Skyride with two banjo player cartoonists, Christine Shields and Dame Darcy Stanger. And I played guitar in a bunch of bands. I played drums in a band once. And about 20 years ago, I had a band. The thing that everyone's sick of today is bands that just obviously cut and paste performances together in Pro Tools. But I had a band like that in 1995. The whole point was to patch things together that I could never play, that probably nobody at that point could play physically.
Yeah.
And there was a song from that on the Gummo soundtrack.
Oh, cool. So
along with Burzum and I Hate God and Bathory, the greats, and then a strange footnote in metal history, my contribution.
So we could definitely say musician then.
Yeah, I've been in Switzerland for about a month now, and luckily it's not such a. I know I'm in not much of a metal city because I spied a Jackson Rhodes model from like Randy Rhodes model Shark from like 10 years ago in a pawn shop for $250 and picked that up.
Oh wow.
I was practically crying. You know, I thought these miracles didn't happen anymore, but I guess I'm in a place where a good shredder axe isn't it's not what it should be. It should be just coated in gold and put in the town square.
Maybe I'll have to do that at some point.
Instead, it's all mine.
And you've been a radio DJ, and the reason I say radio is because I've been recently just quit DJing after 5 years, but I was DJing in like live situation, like
Yeah.
a club or whatever, and I wanted to define that for people that you were doing it on radio. You ever done the live thing?
Yeah, I've actually played drum and bass records around like 20 years ago. Got really fascinated by the No U-Turn label and some of the darker metalhead stuff. This would be like 96, 97. And my radio, yeah, the radio show has been a metal history show, and that's been on satellite radio in the States since 2004, right? So pushing like the 12th year.
Wow.
I think they had like maybe 100,000 subscribers back then, and now it's maybe pushing 30 million.
Wow.
And I'm not going to say, that I'm sure that the percentage of subscribers to Sirius XM is the same as the percentage of metalheads listening is probably the same as in general population. So,
Incredible.
but even 5% or whatever of that many is a pretty huge audience.
I think it might have been around 2004 when Sirius satellite radio, just to explain to us English people what it is. I remember doing an interview on there. I went to the offices in New York,
Oh yeah.
and it was all new. It was like a satellite radio where you could get it on in your car and everything, and it was like, we didn't really know what it was, all this new digital age. It was very
And
interesting.
it was a very new thing for the States. I guess you guys had that with Sky TV, right? You didn't really have cable in the 90s. You had
Satellite, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was all new for you guys over there, and it was very interesting. I'm glad it's still going, actually, because it is kind of like modern. And before we get too lost, I wanted to let you know that I did see AC/DC on the same tour as you did in 1982. I don't have the ticket stub anymore. I think my dad might still have it somewhere, maybe. But yeah, I remember Y&T was opening.
Yes, they were pelted relentlessly with half-filled plastic beer cups.
I don't remember. All I remember is that it was full of bikers, and I was very scared, like intimidated by the whole thing. The smell, the sound, the everything. I mean, I went with my dad. He took us there to see AC/DC, and it was in like an old railway shed, so it wasn't nice. It was nowhere to sit. It was just like puddles of piss everywhere. It was awful, and it was very metal. And I just remember being scared to death. I don't know why.
I remembered being checked when we went in, and as like a 12-year-old, nobody was interested in patting me down, but they were searching everyone, and there was a garbage can filled with switchblades, and I remember that really clearly, and I thought, that can't be, that's as years went on, I started to doubt my memory that this, maybe I was a little like too wide-eyed, and maybe there were a couple of knives in there or something. But thanks to Facebook reconnecting you with everyone you've ever known in your life, I know 3 or 4 people that were with me that night. Everybody vouches for the general insanity of it. I mean, me seeing them in Germany, it was an insane audience. It really was like people were jumping off of bus stops, and there was broken glass everywhere, and the trash can full of knives, and then inside the place, really like Y&T were lucky to escape with their lives. Just like hated, It took me years to really even give a Y&T record a fair shake. The whole show, I just remember being like a barrage of active ingredients, right? It was like bells, and then Angus Young on Brian Johnson's shoulders walking through the audience, and he's sweating all over everybody, and cannons are blowing smoke bombs, and it was crazy.
I remember it wasn't my first ever show. I saw Scorpions the year before on the Blackout tour, and I can't remember who was opening for them. I can't
Probably
remember.
It's always, with Scorpions, it's always like, oh yeah, Judas Priest and Rainbow and Thin Lizzy all opened. It's like discouraging, amazing sounding opening.
I can't remember. I'd have to try and look it up, but that would be the official first band I ever saw live at 11 years old. I found the whole thing very intimidating. Just the sound, it like made the venue shake, and I was scared to death. I was just young. I was very timid. All changed later on when I started drinking. But I remember seeing Metallica in the early days. They always had really cool opening acts. I saw them with Anthrax in
Yeah,
'86, and then I saw them with Danzig on their first record. It had only been out a week.
yeah.
And then I guess after the Black Album, they stopped doing like opening acts, and I can only presume that it was because the crowd didn't want to wait any longer. They just wanted Metallica.
Yeah, and they started playing they started making films and stuff to show beforehand.
Yeah, the backstage shit, and I was like, that's such a shame, because a lot of people, loved these new bands they were exposing, but they kind of dropped that. I don't know if it's because of the aggression of the audience towards the opening acts. Difficult to tell.
It's hard to. I can't remember seeing anyone open for Metallica in a long time. Yeah, since the Black Album.
Yeah, and now they do it. Obviously, they have like bands doing it again, but
Yeah, they toured with Gojira.
because I mean, when Danzig played, all the audience was like spitting on them,
Right.
and I remember saying to a guy in the crowd, like, "Don't do that," like I fucking loved them because I'd only had the record a week, and even though it wasn't like Justice for All, it was very like technical and heavy. It's quite kind of stripped down. When they were live, it was so loud and so raw that I personally think they blew Metallica away. Because it was just like the first album, but turned up to like 100 decibels.
Right. It's like super stripped down.
Yeah, and John Christ was such an accomplished guitar player. You know what I mean? It was like I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, Metallica were in retrospect sloppy and drunk.
Right.
Bit of a shame, really. You saw Metallica play in '86?
Yes, I saw them opening for Ozzy Osbourne.
Wow, right.
So that was a huge moment for the U.S. I mean, that was like, Ozzy Osbourne was already great at introducing new, fearless really with who he took on the road with him. He had just 2 years earlier, like anointed Motley Crue, basically. They became superstars. The early tours, he always had good opening acts. And then this was, the spring of '86. Yeah, that was, it was incredible. Yeah. They were playing like only songs from the first three albums and playing it in arenas or not huge stadiums, but big concert halls.
I think that's where you could see Metallica potentially could blow up because they were really taken to that bigger audience then.
Well, they did. At least in the States, that's really, they were made after that,
Yeah, you could see the potential.
And even in Justice for All was double platinum in the States before they even had a video on MTV.
I know, it's incredible to think that video thing, where they didn't want to do it.
I know. Yeah, kind of a pointless stance to take, really, but it was a different time. There was a battle going on in music. Video bands versus actual bands.
Yeah,
there's always some kind of a war. There are millions of wars today. Digital versus analog, auto-tune versus real bands, where clear vocals, and a lot of times as the years go on, whatever the issues are of the day don't seem all that crucial. The principal decision not to make a music video.
To me, it made them cool, but I don't know. It seems like a world away now. AC/DC turned out to be my favourite band of all time, I guess. And Back in Black was my second ever album, whereas I know it was your first.
I think I listed it in alphabetical order, those essential records. But in a way, I always think about AC/DC as being I don't know what, but the connection of AC/DC to the new wave of British heavy metal is something I don't think people talk about very much. But considering that they'd relocated to the UK and that so many new wave of British heavy metal bands sounded like AC/DC. If they weren't all Iron Maiden.
No.
there were lots of AC/DC versions. They should be credited for being just a huge source of energy in heavy metal around 78, 79, 80, but especially in the UK. Because, we did a book with Mark Evans, who played bass on the first 3.5 AC/DC albums. And he moved to London with them and then ended up getting the sack after crossing paths with Angus and Malcolm one too many times. They never went back after that. So that, that's like already 78. They made London their home and didn't really plan on conquering. They conquered Australia enough and then wanted to conquer the world, and they needed to be in London to do that.
It's a shame they had to lose Bon Scott in that mix. I
Yes.
guess moving to London obviously took its toll on Bon. But that's all history now. Can't do anything about it now. I know you said you were born in Switzerland and then moved to the States when you were very young.
Yeah.
So I was curious why you've moved back to Switzerland now.
I have very young kids, and I lived in New York City for 20 some years, 23, 24 years, and saw my neighborhood change from being basically like a remote outpost, kind of like Montana, to being like a new Times Square, a new center of the world. And I lived through the gentrification of the city, and it kind of lost its magic for me. So I figured I would leave for someplace a little more where it's easier to keep one foot in nature, so I can run with the wolves and all that.
Of course.
And for the werewolf attacks. And yeah, well, yeah, having small kids, I just kind of wanted them, I wanted to have them be able to run wild when they have their wolf attacks, when their lycanthropy kicks in. So it's kind of like the nice, desirable places in the States are extremely expensive to live right now because they're all, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles is nice, but as a New Yorker, I'm not really ready to cry surrender and move to California just yet. My kids and I are Swiss citizens, along with being U.S. citizens. So I figured instead of just having it be a novelty, I would actually put it to use. The thing is, from my work, I can be anywhere, so I might as well just try something else.
That's good. I mean, it sounds very positive.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. It's a challenge, dragging everybody over to a place where I can halfway speak French, but it's not so bad. But it's an interesting time in Europe too. There's all kinds of stuff going on. This place is in flux.
Yeah, have you ever been to Yorkshire?
I have not.
Yeah, don't bother.
It seems like the people are great.
Well, arguably. I live down south now, and people are very different here. Not in a negative way, it's just very different. People seem very nice and hello in the street and all that. And when I'm down here, people don't even fucking say anything after 10 years of talking. They see you around, they don't even say anything. Is it like that in Switzerland? I don't know.
Well, I can't say. I've only been here a few weeks.
Yeah, I don't know. Have you been?
Somebody was recently complaining to me about that, though.
It's just different. I mean, I don't see people are any. Once you know them, they're friendly, but they seem to be more guarded, I guess, down here. I guess they've got more money to lose, whereas in Yorkshire we don't have any. It's just hard work and grit. But I guess the Dales there are very nice. They potentially influenced Tolkien to write about the Shire.
Right.
So maybe people in Lancashire would argue that. But so I want to know, me being curious about book publishing, how's that going? Because I listened to Danko Jones's podcast with you from about 3 years ago, and you were very, very busy putting out a lot of books right then.
I think those first few years were extremely difficult because I knew enough to have a go at it, and everything from the very beginning worked. Every book seemed to do better than every book was like profitable and admired by the audience, and people were excited about reading them. But every book also had its own challenge. Like there was, we would reach almost the finish line and realize that half the book had to be rescanned or something like that. There was the basics and the writing part of things. All of that was what I knew best in the beginning. And now I feel like I kind of learned every possible other aspect of running a publishing operation. I've probably I've designed half the books myself now, and I know that it's kind of crude and rudimentary, but I did the right things, and they turned out looking good and looking like kind of correct, I guess. It's the right look for what these books are. And all of these things were like massive gun to my head, learn this or quit. Yeah. Quitting was never an option. So now I can just kind of focus on what's fun about doing this, finding like a grain of a book, and it's more comfortable to know what the work is going to be that's going to go into it. So we have a bunch of things coming up in the next few years. There's a straight edge book by Tony Rettman, who wrote the New York hardcore book, and that's going to be a challenge because there's such a thin line between seeing the humor in straight edge and taking the piss, which isn't the point at all. Mike McPadden, who wrote the Heavy Metal Movies book, is doing a teen sex comedy book about 70s drive-in movies and 80s basically video, VHS wonders, stuff like Porky's and the 9 million movies about 14-year-olds trying to have sex at summer camps and fraternity houses, etc. And looks like we're doing a book on Link Wray, who is American primitive rock and roll guitar player who had some of the first hits with power chords and used to sabotage his amps to make them to sound, there was no pedal distortion in 1955, so he would just either, as legend has it, take his switchblade and slice holes in the speakers, or else just ram a pencil in or something like that. And for that, all of these books that we've done kind of tie together, more or less. There's a connection. Even we did a Nightwish book, and there were some first degree connections to the Slayer Mag book with that, but also Finland's part of Scandinavia, and with the Swedish death metal book and the Swedish Sensations Films book, there are just some players that overlapped and all that.
It's good that there's a strain that connects them, because I'm kind of like that in my life. I like things that connect.
And it's there, and Link Ray is like something that in some directions, Link Ray ends up being the Circle Jerks, and in some other directions, he ends up being, taken in a heavy metal direction. He ended up being a direct influence on Motorhead and AC/DC, and Bazillion Points is just building this universe of knowledge about things that are truly important in life. Black leather and loud noise.
And being straight edge.
That is the first book that I don't have a personal connection to. But I do, in a way, I kind of admire it as a secular religion.
Well, as a venture, I think it's very interesting, because it is something that's kind of overlooked as a bit of a joke, and it's not. I think it's a good thing. If people can abscond from life, let them. I don't know, me being a heavy drinker at some part in my life, I kind of failed at that. So I'm very interested in it. You know what I mean? And if I had a book idea, it would be my connection with alcohol and metal. It's something that's overlooked as a massive influence. I've thought about it a lot, because we've had famous people die from alcohol, so it's taken away from us, and it's also given us that, you Friday night with your friends listening to the radio, and you drink a bit of vodka, and suddenly you turn it up and you start headbanging, and that's it, you're a metaler.
Yeah.
So I've had this notion that alcohol has played a huge part in heavy metal without any recognition.
And universally too.
Yeah,
whether you're in Japan or Finland, Indonesia or
anywhere.
Or Finland.
Where you might actually die before you turn 18. But one of my favorite bands being Metallica used to be known as Alcoholica, and even though I didn't really focus on that when I was young, I didn't take that in as much. I realized how damaging it was for them later in life. And
there's something they had to live up to that they, no human could really endure.
Yeah, and obviously be the chapter of Bon Scott died from alcohol, and people like that. I'd have to obviously research that bit, I'm sure, who died. But it's I think it's a very interesting thing that people overlook is alcohol directly.
I heard a funny story about Ghost recently, that the original guy who started Ghost was from the Swedish death metal band Repugnant.
Yeah.
And then he brought in Tobias, the other guy from Repugnant, who's well known to be the main guy in Ghost now. And that basically at some point control of the band went to Tobias, and he said, and he gave the other guy an ultimatum, like, you got to stop drinking if we're going to keep going on tour and become this huge thing.
Yeah.
And the other guy was like, well, no way. I'm not drinking or the band. Well, obviously this is like secondhand, third-hand information. And also probably was a lot more to the dynamic than that, but it is funny. I don't know. It's almost like a comic strip.
Yeah.
Especially if they were in costume at the time.
It's funny because my dad worked in a factory all his life. And he had a friend there who drank twice. He got drunk twice a day. He was a proper alcoholic. He died at 41, and he only ever had one girlfriend. And she said after 2 years of a relationship, she said it's either me or the alcohol. She was that sick of it, and he chose alcohol and died a few years later from kidney failure. So I guess some people just don't see a life without it. You can't see, the damage it's doing. It's very interesting.
Wasn't it a couple of years ago a book, something like a lawyer in London around the year 1500 or something? His journal was found, and he was meticulous about annotating the events of his day with what he was drinking at the time. And there was no source of fresh water in London, so everyone just drank bitters and beer. And it was this incredible, prodigious intake, like wake up, have biscuits and beer for breakfast, go to work, have 2 bottles of wine with lunch, beer in the afternoon, and then, then the drinking starts after work.
Yeah.
Does this ringing any bells?
Yeah, no.
Does it remind you of anyone?
Well, yeah, everybody in England. It's funny because, I mean, I'll probably cut this out of the episode, but even Hitler commented on the British. He said, the king to the common man are all alcoholics in England. So I guess when you get someone like that commenting on how much booze we're drinking, it's time to sort of give it up as a bit of a bad job, I guess. But I have heard that story about yeah, we had dirty water for a long time, and people would rather drink alcohol, obviously. What an excuse. But I think one of the tragedies of alcohol is maybe Jeff Hanneman, and
Yes.
it was kind of covered over with a spider bite. In reality, Jeff just couldn't stop drinking, and it killed him. I found it very disheartening that people couldn't admit that.
No, he's the first of that generation to go.
Yeah.
Many others dropped off from ill-advised drug use, but usually, I mean, even Lemmy's managed to like reach that William Burroughs level of pickling where you just constantly renew your cells somehow. Jeff Hanneman was not very old to be not a death by misadventure like Bon Scott, but just poisoning him, killing himself.
Yeah, and the bit I found bad at him was that people around him were kind of willing to make excuses for it to the point where it would kill him. And it was, I don't know, I found it to be a big shame. Obviously, being a fan. We toured with Slayer once, and a funny story was that I once beat Jeff at Madden on the PlayStation, and for the rest of the tour he wouldn't speak to me because he said an Englishman can't play an American game, and that was it. I was out of the dressing room, never to be invited in again. It was like, bullshit, get out.
And what was your secret? Just mashing the buttons randomly?
I don't remember. I think if we like both played like the latest version of Madden now, we could just randomly just be as good as it as if you played it all your life. It's just games are like that. It's like beginner's luck. I didn't know how to play it. It was like 31-30 was the final score. So it wasn't like a trounced him. But him and his crew guys were very fucking angry with me.
It's like we're doing this GBH book now, and at some point GBH beat Agnostic Front in baseball.
Yeah, see, it's just backwards.
How?
What the fuck? I mean, I remember a few years ago, e-books and tablets was kind of challenging books, but it seems to have waned a little bit. And people's
Yes.
like vinyl, people would rather have a book than a fucking tablet.
It's even more. It's even more of a loss. I mean, if your ears aren't that good to begin with, an MP3 player and a record won't sound too different. And maybe you don't have the beautiful artwork and the vinyl to hold in your hands, but then again, that's space you can use for something else. You can start it, you can put a still in your apartment or something. But as far as books go, it's a completely different experience. And you're talking about like surrendering a book for something that then you have to plug in and keep charged and protect at the beach or in your bag. Or I think that the whole relentless surge of conversation about ebooks 3 or 4 years ago was pretty much just totally wishful thinking on the part of bookstores and even publishers who, didn't want to. It is a super pain in the ass to store books and to ship them around. So doing away with that would be wonderful, but it's just not that easy. And so, you had Amazon like basically giving away these Kindles. And, the minute that they stop subsidizing every single Kindle purchase, then you start to see that it's not actually really catching on. It's just something it's on their homepage. They're pushing it. Holidays come and they email every single Amazon customer 50 times that this is the ultimate present.
Yeah, bullshit.
Nobody will not have one after this holiday is done. And, a lot of people ended up with them, put one book on, and then went right back to not reading. Or, the real challenges to reading and to books are the fact that everyone spends all day with their noses buried in Facebook and, playing fruit and jewel games on their phones.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's not the crashing plane we're expecting, is it?
I'll let you know in about 3 seconds.
But, like being in a touring band, the notion of like having a Kindle with all the books you ever owned on was fucking great.
Right.
But I would rather like trots these like 5 books around the world, like breeze blocks, It was a nightmare. And like you say, eventually you gave up and just fucking looked on Facebook anyway, so you never spend any time reading. It was so destructive. And how do you find that, like Facebook as a phenomenon?
It's beyond its point of maximum happiness, Now it's just a social experiment in the hands of a curious corporation.
The jury's out on how much damage it's doing to us,
Yeah.
Well, just switch it off. We'll see. Just switch it off one day and we'll see what fucking problems people have.
Smiling, happily dancing in the park.
Talking.
This is madness. We've got to get that Facebook back on as soon as possible.
Reading.
Way too much conversation and interaction. People are speaking to one another again. No.
But I'm very critical of it, you know. I always do an introduction to my show that's really snipey about how society is. It's not aimed at any particular one person. It's just how society is so easily tricked into being dumb, and it is a social experiment.
It is. Gravity is a powerful force.
It's very, very weird. And obviously, you being a book publisher, you might be right on the brink of, like, you know, your little fortress is just left, like a little island of sanity. Even though you're putting out books about straight edge.
You know, what does happen is, especially during the final push, you know, like the last quarter of working on a book, I really will just disappear into a void for sometimes months. And it's true that the world moves on. And I sometimes like peek out like Rip Van Winkle. You know, like what? You know, what's happening now?
I kind of miss that though. You know, like when you get so wrapped up in expression and finishing the job, you know, like recording an album 10 months in a studio,
yes.
You come out all looking grey and kind of, you know, transparent, looking like a jellyfish. It's so weird. And yeah, you've got no idea who's put a record out, who's toured. You know, people have got married and died and fucking divorced. You know what I mean? It's really odd.
The clubs in your town have like half of them are gone and they're new ones.
Yep. And you know, your girlfriend's got a new boyfriend.
Fortunately, I somehow managed to dodge that one.
So one of the bigger questions I wanted to ask, and this is nothing to do with publishing now. You grew up virtually the same time as me and hopefully experienced Star Wars like I did the first time it came out.
Yes.
Went there very naively. I'd seen some cards and the comics or whatever, and we went and fucking hell, man, it just changed our lives in about 2 hours. Came out of there.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's something that I always wonder about. I read the comic before I saw the movie.
Yeah.
What? They released a comic with the entire story before the film. That's strange, right?
Well, they did it for all 3 films.
Huh.
But they don't do it now because
It was
obviously
very weird being a kid and seeing a movie that I already knew the story, you know.
Yeah, you could actually buy the book as well and read it. But that was, you know, I was like 8, so I was into comics more. Yeah, you could see the whole fucking story in the comic. And it was like, still completely blew me away. I didn't visualize the comic on the screen so well.
No, I was obsessed. And all my old second grade, third grade, whatever papers survived from that time are just covered with little badly drawn spaceships and Darth Vaders and things.
Exactly the same. TIE fighters, X-Wings, the Death Star, and all that shit. It's just like little pen drawings on my, you know, maths book. Have you got a good feeling about these new ones?
Okay, the director is J.J. Abrams, right? Who did the Star Trek film?
That's right, yeah.
That was terrible.
Right.
My daughter watches My Little Pony, which is all about these little Dayglow, huge eyeballed ponies who try and please a witch who is trying to get them to understand their emotions better. That's exactly what the Star Trek plot was. It was like, help Spock understand his emotions. And so after seeing that, I've seen a bunch of artwork from the new Star Wars, and it looks great. Mm-hmm. But then I think, you know, that director, he really made a shit version of Star Trek. He made something that made me long for the story complexity of My Little Pony, and that's pretty. well, that's pretty sad.
That's really terrible because Disney have now got control of this.
Yes.
Who are masters at like sort of transposing these kids' stories into, I guess, an adult film. Well, the jury's out, but I recently saw on Netflix a movie called Chimpanzee, which is about a little monkey. It's a Disney film. It's about a little chimp called Oscar, and it's like a David Attenborough style film where he's in the Amazon forest following this little monkey around. It's got all the drama, you know, his mum dies and he's going to starve to death and all that shit. You cry, you laugh, you're scared. I'm just thinking this potentially could be better than the new Star Wars film. And it's just about it's just about a fucking chimp. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, really? But obviously we remember what it used to be like, and it's like, I guess like when Metallica got Bob Rock involved.
Yeah.
They appealed to like 20 million people that the year before fucking hated Metallica. And I think that's what's going to happen with the Star Wars films. There's going to be 20 people shouting me down going, no, you're wrong. It's fucking great. You know what I mean? It's not. It's just the music's great. And you buy toilet paper if you fucking add the music to that. I don't know. I think they're missing the point, really. I'm very critical of it all, as you can tell.
Fair enough.
We'll see.
I always have high enough hopes. And then for something like Star Wars, if it fails me, then I'll just feel like, well, it's not really for me anyway.
Yeah,
And it's possible. It's
allegedly.
not for anyone else either.
Did you see the film first time round at the cinema?
Yes, and at the drive-in, and
Anywhere?
anytime they seem to be in the 1970s, a hit film would just show for years.
Yeah, they'd be on
They
all the
kept bringing
time.
them back, and there'd be another theater in another town, and same with Jaws and the Black Hole, that Disney space movie.
Well, it's dated badly, but I loved it at the time. And I'm a bit of a toy collector, and I've got all the original toys still from Black Hole.
Ah, yeah,
Which,
that's cool.
but just going back to books before I forget,
Yeah.
I remember Henry Rollins a few years ago saying that he wrote a very important book, Get in the Van,
Yes.
and he felt it was so important, and he sort of went along the lines that kids don't read these days, so he did the audiobook of that, which was very cool.
He also has a long career of. I mean, he's been doing spoken word longer than he's been publishing
Yeah.
books. I remember seeing Black Flag in '86, and he was peddling his tracks. He had like three little poetry books, Polio Flesh, and a couple others. Those were the first releases on his imprint 1361, and that was already a couple of years after he'd been doing the spoken word performances in LA. So
You never thought of going down that route? Not personally, but like maybe with the company doing like audiobooks.
yeah, I suppose that would be a good idea. Some of the books don't lend themselves to that, but some do. There was some interest in converting our book, What Are You Doing Here, written by Lena Dawes, and I thought she would be a good candidate for someone to read their own book. I mean, it's a strange thing, right? When you write a book, and then if it's not Henry Rollins narrating his own book, it's just, an actor.
When I spoke to Doug Bradley, he has a company called Spine Chillers, and they do Poe and Lovecraft, and he does some of them, and Robert England, Jeffrey Combs from Reanimator, they all kind of do this spoken word stuff.
I wish we could have Tesco V read his book, but his doesn't exactly lend itself to that, the touch and go book.
Yeah, you'd have to sort of adapt it a little bit, maybe. It sounds like a lot of work.
Dramatize these record reviews from
The,
1982, but
the screenplay, I don't know.
yeah, somewhere I've got there was Jaws, the
Yeah.
Peter Benchley book, and then there was the film Jaws. Then there is a paperback of a novelization of the screenplay written by, a third party. It's not written by Steven Spielberg or Peter Benchley. It's
Jaws,
somebody whose job it was just to take the script and turn it into a paperback.
when Jaws came out, I remember my dad had already read the original, and when he went to see the film, he was kind of disappointed. I mean, obviously he was our age, and I was only like 8, scared. I was just scared to death. Like I never got in the bath for another 20 years. But you know what I mean? He was like disappointed because there was a lot more dynamic to the book than there is in the movie.
The book is always better than the movie.
Yeah, like, arguably. Yeah, I agree. You know what I mean? It was like my dad was disappointed in Jaws. He was happy that we were scared. Me and my brother were scared to death.
Yeah, it's funny how parents have no time for a lot of things that we think are so important.
Are you going to do that to your young children?
As long as they stay on the correct path of liking good things, then.
But I think Jaws is the best movie of all time, so I kind of can't blame my dad now. You know what I mean? But it did affect you, like you're going swimming in the pool at school, and it's quite deep at one end, and you think, fuck that, I'm not going over there. But obviously they're talking about remaking it. I read that earlier today that they might be potentially remaking Jaws, and it's no. What's your take on all these remakes?
I mean, it's terrible, right? It's not even cannibalism. It's
just shit. Well, let me throw one at you. All right.
Okay.
Dirty Harry's going to be remade with Will Smith.
Well, they should stick with the sequel to Wild Wild West.
Is he not a comedian?
Yeah, he's kind of a comedian, right?
Yeah.
Well, he's been in a lot of apocalyptic films lately. It's not really a remake. I Am Legend. That was pretty good.
Okay.
And then there were a couple other things I haven't seen.
But Dirty Harry?
No.
He's just not cold enough. Harry Callahan was a cold person. The Prince of Bel-Air.
Yeah, he's a Dayglow rapper,
Exactly.
Parents just don't understand.
For me, it just says that nothing's sacred, when they do this kind of thing. You could remake Star Wars, I guess. I don't know. I just don't understand it. But you could transpire that to sort of the rehashing of like old music, like like you mentioned Ghost earlier, and you said you didn't like intentionally retro music. Would you categorize them as that?
Oh no, I think Ghost is like meticulously designed music. It's masterfully pulled off. I mean, yes, it's incredibly borrowed, but it's masked in so well, and it suits the times. Right, it's basically one guy with a couple of minions, and if the record industry completely tanked tomorrow, that's a scalable, functional band. And they kind of have this eye of the beholder thing too, where whatever it is that you like about them is what you see, and that's what you were saying. But well, a lot of people just detest them, but then a lot of people like the catchy songs or like the outfits, or it's pretty satanic.
Yeah, borderline Satanist, like myself, obviously.
Yeah.
I've always prided myself on being a borderline Satanist.
Yeah, a half-assed Satanist.
Yeah, half-assed, yes. So you've got a lot planned for. I mean, how do you run the business from like Switzerland to New York?
Well, last year we released 4 books, and everything was completely dedicated to production. And this year we've been reprinting. We reprinted already New York Hardcore twice, and Sub Pop USA and Swedish Death Metal was a little bit overdue and got reprinted. And now we're reprinting Metallica and the Slayer Mag Diaries. So all of this is it's intensive as far as logistics go and getting the books in the right place, but it's not as much of a demand. So I've spent about 6 months setting everything up so that the business office is in Manhattan, and I'm free to be away from the physical books and working right now on finishing the GBH book, and it seems to be going well. The main thing is we had a distributor that we just got rid of, broke off relations with, went back to supplying all the big wholesalers and Amazon and bookstores and record stores directly, which is how we had done it in the beginning. And as part of that, we had always kept our own stashes of books in New York City, which is really expensive. And when we had a shipment of books, they would go to like 3 or 4 different places. And now they all just go to a central warehouse in Chicago. And that's been going really, really well. So it's kind of like we outgrew the garage. Even though we had most of our books centrally located in the middle of the United States, it wasn't like it is now. They weren't directly under our control. And then we had like, I don't know, 1,000 copies of every book that we always had to figure out where to go, and really in the middle of a snowstorm be unloading a truck in the dirty, crowded streets of Brooklyn. It was crazy. Some crazy stuff went down. The first time the Metallica was printed, a semi truck pulled up and there were 13 pallets of books. The driver was like, "Let me know when you're done." So, okay, so that's how I learned how to use a pallet jack. And yeah, with the books, it's a big thing. Where do you put all this stuff?
I remember when CDs came out, everybody thought, yeah, they're smaller, so you can obviously like get rid of vinyl because they're heavy. A box of 100 vinyls is way heavier than a box of 100 CDs.
Yeah.
We were metal, so we couldn't really get rid of vinyl. We always had to press everything on all formats. So we never really saw the decline of vinyl, really. It made a bit of a comeback now.
What a great label.
You think?
Peaceful, yeah.
Wow. I remember when Metallica came to the offices.
Wow, that was, yeah.
Yes, it's like 1990, and he wrote an interview in the Slayer book.
Yeah, there's like there was a message to him on a matrix, right?
I can't remember. I have read the interview from the book actually, because I don't get mentioned in the book personally, but I remember having to pick him up from the train station to come down to the offices, and it was lovely to meet him because he was such a cool guy in the scene. Have you ever met him?
Oh yeah, we were pen pals in the mid '80s, so we had a relationship going back that long, and he's been to the States, I'm going to say every year since Metallica came out. So I've basically seen him every year.
You were a big fan of like Morbid Angel.
Yeah, I was a tape trader. So when a lot of those first early death metal records came out, they didn't have the same impact as the demos. The early Death and Obituary stuff. It was like, especially Death, that band was insane in 1985, but by the time Scream Bloody Gore came out, 3 years had passed and Napalm Death was already, people had already heard Carcass and Napalm Death. But I think that the early Earache was much faster. Earache just kind of swooped it all up, and it was just one unmissable thing after the next, and in every different direction. That's what I think was the most exciting about it. That Bolt Thrower and Morbid Angel couldn't be, I think, more different as people and what they were trying to do, but it just kind of fused together to, it's still legendary what Earache did.
Yeah, I remember. We were their rivals. It was a very interesting time.
Well, you definitely beat them on black metal.
They even black metal beat us on that because we didn't really understand what was going on at the time. Very interesting time, very magical.
Yeah, I've kind of blinked during that period, and then all of a sudden there was mayhem, and then I blinked, and then there were 50 bands out of Norway.
So to finish on, Ian, I want to just say, like, and this would be a bit of a surprise because some people would say, like, what would your 5 desert island discs be? And I'm not that interested in that because, we're into music. People probably can tell. But I've been doing this thing where I've been like 5 survival items you'd take on a desert island instead. What would your 5 items be?
Let's see.
Off the top of your head.
Fire is nice.
So yeah, some way of starting a fire.
Some coffee. How long am I going to be there?
Well,
maybe I have to think about how deep I need to go into this. Like, do I need a coffee plant?
Just thinking the first night, you got to survive the first week.
All right, coffee, whiskey, some way to make fire, a blanket, and a pen and paper.
Well, that's 6 officially, but I'll go with that. Coffee and whiskey would be a good mix. Fuck. Because I was more like a machete.
I was imagining a kind of a sandy island, but
yeah, without the machete, you'd be pretty fucked. Well, thanks for your time, Ian. It's been really cool.
Yeah, thanks very much. No, good luck with everything. You're really in flux.
And I want to say thanks to Magnus for setting this up. Actually, he's been very cool.
Yeah, no, thanks. I'm very flattered.
And be in touch, all right? If you need anything.
Okay.
Cool, man.
Same to you.
Communication is information. Information is knowledge. Knowledge is power. Power is everything. Power is everything. Power is everything. Power is everything.
Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.